boys and girls, and welcome to a special edition of Sherwood Forest. On today's show, we're going to visit the 20th century.
The 1920s, a decade in review. The 1920s opened on a high note for many people. Men were returning from World War I to find jobs with higher wages and less hours than before. Women were breaking old traditions by wearing shorter skirts and shorter hairstyles. The 1920s also signaled the start of prohibition and organized crime in America. Baseball was the sport sweeping the nation, and passenger airlines were established. In other parts of the world, things were not going so well. In India, Gandhi was fighting for independence for his country. 1921 brought about Lenin and the start of communism in Russia. Europe was suffering from the after effects of World War I. In America, the shorter work hours led to more free time, which meant a great demand for entertainment. Silent movies were very popular, and some of the biggest box office draws of the time came from funny man Charlie Chaplin and heartthrob Rudolph Valentino, not to mention Mary Pickford and Lillian Gish. Nightclubs and music also became very popular pastimes, and the dance craze sweeping the nation was the Charleston. Babe Ruth became the biggest sports celebrity of the time. Other people to enter the limelight of the American people were then President Calvin Coolidge. In Germany, a young fanatic was arrested and while in prison wrote a book entitled Mein Kampf. The man was Adolf Hitler. Public enemy number one, Al Capone, ruled the streets of Chicago, and in Italy, Mussolini came to power. Many people came to read books in the 1920s, and some of the most widely read books were A Farewell to Arms, The Forsyth Saga, and All Quiet on the Western Front. Despite all the developments of the 1920s, such as the discovery of penicillin, the stock market plummeted in October of 1929. A decade that started on such high hopes ended in the Great Depression.
Next up, we have a silent movie.
the 30s, a decade in review. In national news, we got off to a rough start as the Depression of 1929 worsened, throwing millions of Americans into poverty. Hundreds of veterans marched on the Capitol, demanding the bonus they were promised in 1918. President Hoover called on the armed forces to evict the so-called bonus army from the Capitol. Finally, a ray of hope, as former New York Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt wins the 1932 presidential election, promising a new deal for the American people. Among the acts, Prohibition is repealed, Social Security is founded, and the WPA starts to put people back to work. On the international scene, however, Europe moves toward war as dictatorships rise in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Austria. In Germany, the leader of the National Socialists, or Nazi Party, Adolf Hitler, drove his nation into war, annexing Austria, overrunning Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Low Countries, and is now on the borders of France. On a lighter note, the national entertainment scene, top motion pictures were Gone with the Wind, Frankenstein, Mutiny on the Bounty, and the first feature-length color cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Top music for the 1930s was the big band sound, with dances like the Jitterbug, Big Apple, and Lindy Hop sweeping the nation. The most famous names of the decade: former President Herbert Hoover, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, German Chancellor Adolf Hitler, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, First Lord of the Admiralty Sir Winston Churchill, and most notably, King Edward VIII, who abdicated his throne to marry an American divorcee. The most notable authors of the 1930s were John Steinbeck for The Grapes of Wrath, Tortilla Flat, and Of Mice and Men. Also Ernest Hemingway for Death in the Afternoon. And now we will close with some of the inventions in technology we have found over the past 10 years. The electric razor, radar, television, jet engines, the superliners, fastest transatlantic boats yet known, the Normandy, the Queen Mary, and the Queen Elizabeth. The synthetic material nylon is discovered, ballpoint pens, fluorescent lighting, helicopters, jet aircraft, and finally, scientists split the atom, throwing the rules of physics out the window.
Hal Roach was the creator of our gang, also known as the Little Rascals.
We're going to start our rallies. We hope you like the show. Everything is ready. We're raring to go. We'll give you all the latest songs and dances full of vim. We're gonna start with high jump. Just watch these chorus steps.
Want some ham and eggs?
Oh boy, I like ham and eggs.
And some oatmeal?
Boy, do I like oatmeal.
Big beef steak and some pork chops?
Don't you order no spinach?
And a piece of chocolate cake?
Oh boy, do I like chocolate cake.
And a piece of pie?
Oh boy, I like pie.
And a couple of those buns?
Boy, am I hungry.
What do you have, Spanky?
I'll take the same.
Okay.
Well, what do you kids want?
I have a double order of ham and eggs and a piece of pie and a cup of coffee.
Well, do you have any money?
No.
Nope.
Well, how do you expect to eat?
We don't expect it. We just want it.
And now we have monsters for you.
Horror movies have been around for ages, right? Wrong. Although most everyone has heard of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, early movie monsters were extremely rare. Frankenstein is thought to have been the first horror movie produced in a simple yet quite fearsomely convincing manner in the silent films of Thomas Edison. But even though many of these hideous creatures were around before the invention of motion pictures and were even greater known in the horror spoofs of the 50s, the best and most artistic views of these film creatures is in the black and white screen hits of the late 1920s and early 1930s. Probably the best known Frankenstein is the 1931 version starring Boris Karloff, who also played the stitched together giant in its many sequels, including Bride of Frankenstein in 1935 and Son of Frankenstein in 1939. Karloff made the part forever his in the 1931 version of Frankenstein, the most famous horror movie ever. Karloff also played in the original Mummy in 1932. Although the Mummy only grossed a mere $25,000 on a $250,000 investment, Karloff would be forever remembered as the Mummy by fans for years to follow. Probably the most famous horror star of this period is Lon Chaney. Chaney not only could bring any horror character alive through his magnificent acting, but he also did all his own makeup. Probably Chaney's first film would have been The Blind Bargain, in which he played an ape man. Chaney also appeared in the 1923 classic The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but most likely The Phantom of the Opera in 1925 was Lon Chaney's most famous performance. In Phantom, Chaney not only put together one of his best makeup jobs, he also put himself through many physical strains during the film. In the film, Chaney plays a deformed man who lives in an underground lair beneath the Paris Opera House who falls in love with a beautiful singer. Phantom of the Opera was a story to be copied in many films to follow, but none would ever match that of the original starring Chaney. Another Chaney classic was his performance as a vampire in London After Midnight. And finally, Bela Lugosi showed us all what a vampire was really like in Dracula in 1931. Lugosi's performance in Dracula would change the views of horror fans for years, with its special effects and the part that Lugosi was meant to play. Lugosi never did make another movie quite like Dracula. However, he did star in Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1932, and he also played in the almost forgotten White Zombie, also in 1932. So as you see, there were many horror movies in the late 20s and early 30s that would change the views of filmgoers forever.
The decade of the 1940s is dominated by the Second World War. Until 1945, the world was engaged in the most costly and destructive war in history. 1940, Germany invades Denmark and Norway. So to this, U.S. approves a vast expansion of the U.S. Army and Navy. Roosevelt, one of the America's favorite known presidents, was re-elected for president in the 1940s also. 1941, set to declare war on Japan, Germany, and Italy because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Skipping to 1943, dancing takes its toll as a new swinging dance sensation, Jitterbug, makes its way to the top. 1944, the year D-Day was made for the landings in Normandy. Also, once again, Roosevelt is re-elected to a fourth term as president. 1945, the year of glory and happiness, as Germany surrenders to all allies. Japan soon to follow, because of the devastating destruction of Hiroshima by the atomic bomb. World War II ends. 1946, the year Germany was divided into four. Verdict, one of the Nazi leaders, was given a trial, and in the sports, Joe Louis wins his 23rd defense of the heavyweight title. Skipping to 1948, the first rocket missiles were tested for the first time. From this point on, missiles have made a major change for all the upcoming wars, and a major part.
And now we have one of the top groups from the 40s, the Andrews Sisters with a Bugle Boy.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a blowing reveille. He's a boogie boogie bugle boy of Company B. They made him blow a bugle for his Uncle Sam. It really brought him down because he couldn't jam. The captain seemed to understand, because the next day the cap went out and drafted a band. And now the company jumps when he plays reveille. He's a boogie boogie bugle boy of Company B. A toot, a toot, a toot-a-toot, a toot. He blows it eight to the bar. In boogie rhythm, he can't blow a note unless the bass and guitar are playing with him. He makes the company jump when he plays reveille. He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. He was a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. And when he plays boogie woogie bugle, he was busy as a bee. And when he plays, he makes the company jump eight to the bar. He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. Do-do-do-do-riata, do-riata, do-do, he blows it eight to the bar. He can't blow a note if the bass and guitar isn't with him. The company jumps when he plays reveille. He's a boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Through the century, comedy has played an important role in people's lives. It has pulled us through stressful times like depression and wars. Some of the great comedians like Charlie Chaplin, W.C. Fields, Laurel and Hardy, Jerry Lewis, and the Marx Brothers are still remembered today. Let's take a look at these special few. Charlie Chaplin was and still is considered one of the greatest film comedians of all times. He was born in South London. One of his most famous silent movies was The Little Tramp. He moved to Switzerland to raise a family, and upon return to the U.S., he received a special Academy Award for his massive contribution to motion pictures. Some of his most famous films are The Circus, A King in New York, and The Countess from Hong Kong. W.C. Fields was born in Philadelphia. He ran away at the age of 11 and became a juggler. Some of his most memorable films are $1 Million Legs, My Little Chickadee, and Never Give a Sucker an Even Break. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy teamed up and they made about 12 films a year. They won an Academy Award for The Music Box. After their film career ended, the two continued to work as a comedy team in music halls. Some films they are noted for are The Flying Dancer, The Bullfighter, and Pack Up Your Troubles. Chico, Harpo, Groucho, and Zeppo made up the famous Marx Brothers. They started perfecting their madness in 1914. Zeppo only starred in 5 movies, but the others went on to stardom. Their most famous films include Animal Crackers, A Night at the Opera, A Night at the Circus, and Love Happy.
You know, Lou, they give ball players nowadays very peculiar names. On the St. Louis team, we have who's on first, what's on second, and I don't know who's on third.
That's what I want to find out. I want you to tell me the names of the players on the St. Louis team.
Well, I'm telling you, who is on first, what's on second, and I don't know who's on third.
You know the fellas' names.
Yes.
Well then, who's playing first?
Yes.
I mean the fella's name playing first base.
Who?
The fella on first base for St. Louis.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
Well, what are you asking me for?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Who is on first base?
Well, I'm asking you who's on first base.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who is on first?
Have you got a first baseman on first?
Well, certainly.
Well, then who's on first?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Walter Elias Disney was born into a modest Chicago household on December 5, 1901. His father, Elias Disney, was a building contractor. His mom's name was Flora. Walt had 3 older brothers, Herbert, Raymond, and Roy, and 1 younger sister, Ruth. The family soon moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri, and then, in 1910, they went to live in Kansas City. Of his early life, Disney seems to have remembered with particular affection his period on the farm. Rural values stem from that time. Disney studied art and photography in high school and also served for a year as an ambulance driver in France at the end of the First World War. On his return from France, he obtained employment as a commercial artist in Kansas City, working for a film company that made animated commercials for showing in a city cinema. Disney began to branch out with his own full-blown characters, mainly on fairy tale themes. He was partnered by a brilliant young artist, Oob Iwerks. When Disney set up a base for production of the cartoons in California, he sent for Iwerks to join him from Kansas City. Iwerks worked for the Disney organization until his death in 1971. Steamboat Willie, made in 1928, was the first cartoon with synchronized sound, and it introduced to the movie-going public Disney's most famous character, Mickey Mouse. The Mickey Mouse Club, produced in the 1950s, was the most popular show of its time. When it was on, no child under the age of 15 was found outside. Snow White was the first ever full-length animated feature, which took 3 years to make. Disney's proudest monument is the Disneyland theme park, an idea that started in Disney's mind over a period of 20 years. It finally opened at its site at Anaheim near Los Angeles on his 13th wedding anniversary on July 17, 1955. Its aim was to be a place for people to find happiness and knowledge, to be based upon and dedicated to the ideals, dreams, and hard facts that have created America, and to be filled with the accomplishments, the joys, and the hopes of a world we live in. An equally awesome theme park, Walt Disney World Resort, was opened in Florida in 1971, followed by the Tokyo Disneyland Park in 1983. After Walt's death in 1967, the Disney story continued. While maintaining the tradition established by Walt, the studio began responding to the needs of a new generation of film audiences.
The 1950s brought peace to most and new prosperity to many. The United States emerged as the world's greatest power, its population enjoying a standard of living previously unknown to any nation in history. The United States began research to make a super bomb, more powerful than the one that had wiped out Hiroshima in 1945. 2 years later, an experimental device vaporized an island into a mushroom cloud of dust. The Korean War ended with a cost of 33,629 American lives. Unconfirmed sightings of the abominable snowman began. The first Miss World contest was staged, and Eisenhower wins landslide victory twice during the 1950s. Cinema widescreen movies were first exhibited. The 1950s started a huge wave of flying saucer sightings. Medical research confirms a link between smoking and cancer. The Frisbee was first invented. Alaska and Hawaii became the 49th and 50th states of America. Russia launches Sputnik 1, the world's first satellite, followed by Explorer a year later by the United States. Jacques Cousteau developed the aqualung and underwater television. In the 1950s, people still thought of the films in terms of Hollywood stars and a form of entertainment. Films like West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet, Ben-Hur, A Streetcar Named Desire, and Some Like It Hot, starring the famous Marilyn Monroe, were just a few of the hits of the 50s. By the mid-50s, over 50 million homes had TV sets. The Lone Ranger, I Love Lucy, Hopalong Cassidy, Lassie, and the Mickey Mouse Club were a way of passing many after-school hours for children. In 1955, Rock Around the Clock stayed at the top of the charts for 5 months. 1 year later, it became the title of a film about a new dance craze, rock and roll. Probably one of the most recognized singers in the 1950s was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. He was accused of sneering with his legs. And as we close the 1950s, let's take a look at one of his great live performances.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine. Well, they said you was high class, well, that was just a lie. Yeah, they said you was high class, well, that was just a lie. Yeah, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine. You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
Well, you can rock it, you can roll it, do the stop and even stroll it at the hop. When the record starts spinning, do your lips when you're chicken at the hop. Do the dance sensations that are sweeping the nation.
In 1960, the U.S. elected its youngest president in its history, John F. Kennedy. The young president made the White House a center for the arts and intellectual thought, often inviting musicians and artists to official functions. There was an atmosphere of openness and welcoming of new ideas in the Kennedy administration. Also in the 1960s was the start of the Vietnam War. The attacks were intensified the year in which North Vietnam proclaimed its intention to liberate South Vietnam from the ruling yoke at the U.S. imperialists and their henchmen. And President Richard M. Nixon announced that 25,000 of its U.S. troops would be withdrawn from Vietnam by August of 1969. Another cut of 65,000 troops was ordered by the end of the year. By the end of the war, the South Vietnamese claimed a death toll of over 97,000. As a result of more than 8 years of warfare, it is estimated that more than 2 million Vietnamese were killed and 3 million wounded. Hundreds of children orphaned, and 12 million Indo-Chinese people became refugees. The Vietnam War casualties rose to a total of 57,685 killed and about 153,303 wounded. Popular music of the 1960s was hardly worth discussing seriously. Things actually weren't that bad, but teenagers' rock and roll undeniably had lost a lot of its punch. There was popular music such as Chubby Checker and the Twists, Dion and the Belmonts, the Supremes, the Beatles, James Brown, the Monkees, and many more. And there was such famous movies and shows as Batman, the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, the Munsters, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and the everly popular Leave It to Beaver. The fads and fashions of the 1960s ranged from paper dresses to miniskirts to pantsuits. The 60s were full of messy wars, new presidents, weird music, and fabulous fads.
The dances from the 60s had really weird names, like the twist and the funky chicken and the pony. Let's take a look at how they're done.
Come on, baby, let's do the twist. Come on, baby, let's do the twist. Take me by my little hand and go like this. Yeah.
It's the greatest match
the 60s, Saturday Night Live was popular on the television for the younger group. Let's take a look at the Blues Brothers as we close the show.